Hi, everybody. My name is Ken Stern. I'm the director of the BARD Center for the Study of Hate. Hate studies is a relatively new 20-year-old-ish interdisciplinary approach to looking at how humans define who's us, who's them, demonize them, dehumanize them, find ways to combat it and ways to control it. Looking at things, some of the things that resonated from the discussions earlier today, how people are gravitating to binary things and to think of simple solutions to complicated problems and how to combat that. But I don't think that's why I'm being invited here today. Rebecca Neuwirth invited me because we worked together at the American Jewish Committee for many years. Rebecca, when did you start? What years were you there?
I was there, I think, 1999 to
1992. I was there from 89 to 2014. And thinking about the technology stuff today, it was reminding when I started in 1989, I asked, can I have a computer? And the answer was, what the heck would you need a computer for? We have a word processing center. And then when I started, I was monitoring all the same types of xenophobic, white supremacist things that we were talking about today. But how did I do that? We had some AJC members that had non-Jewish sounding names, and I had some PO boxes, and stuff would come in brown paper envelopes that you couldn't tell from the outside whether it was pornography or hate literature. But we had a room on the 6th floor that had 50 file cabinets and all this stuff was filed. Same ideas that we're talking about today, but a different delivery system. And then the technology, concerns about how does that affect the amplification of the ideas, which to me are the core of this. I remember when telephone answering machines came out, and the big to-do was, oh my God, these guys are doing white power hotlines. It's going to change everything because people can call into a number and get a message. And then shortwave radio programs. And then one of the things that was really influential to me was at the time of the militia movement in '94, which was we were seeing first one, then two militia groups, and then a few months later, 26 states having militias. And they were formed by not only white supremacists, but Christian identity adherents who believed theologically that people of color were not human and Jews were the literal offspring of the devil. And somebody was bright enough to pull together like the 40 of us around the country who were looking at this and confused about what we were seeing to compare notes. And that was the first listserv I was on, and we were looking at the technology. The militias were using faxes, which were new, but also early internet bulletin boards. And the flip side of the fact that they were able to communicate, that they were able to build community, that they were able to make rumors and conspiracy theories seem normative, was that we were all able to watch it. So we put together a report 10 days before the Oklahoma City bombing, saying that these guys are going to do something on the anniversary of Waco. Nobody knew it was going to be that big, but we knew something because we could feel it from monitoring them. And so the idea of the delivery systems to me is critical, but not to lose what some people have been emphasizing today is that it's the ideas that propel it. We talk about the great replacement theory. I can show you things that I had in the AJC archives from the 80s or even going back to the 30s. It was the same idea, just with different packaging. So I'm really delighted today that we can focus in on how these ideas are being used and promoted by today's technology. And I see in some ways this gathering, which I'm very happy that Rebecca and her team pulled together, very much to me reminiscent of what the '94 meeting on the militias did. People that had some contact with each other, but to be able to be in a room, to hear things, to get new ideas, to make new connections. And I encourage you to do the same thing that we did in that '94 meeting, which really helped push back against militias. We focus on what are we going to do in the aftermath, what are we going to learn from each other, who are we going to follow up with, and how we're going to make this more than just an interesting couple of days, but actually build something to give capacity to fight what we're seeing, both online and in the larger societal space. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a very short introduction of the panelists because you have the information in there in the brochure. We're each going to speak 5 to 7 minutes. What I'd like to do too, I have a few questions prepared, but I want to make sure there's enough time for all you folks. And I also want to give some time in case you guys have some things you want to respond to each other. So maybe we'll do that, immediately after. And, I hope it's a productive discussion. So first, Zahed Amanullah, right? Okay, is the senior fellow at the Institute for Strategic Dialogue and helps drive ISD civil society engagement with a view towards countering hate, extremism, and disinformation. Dr. Francesca Tripodi, who hopefully will have tenure next year. We are rooting for that. Is a sociologist and information scholar whose research examines the relationship between search engines, participatory platforms, politics, and society. She's assistant professor at the School of Information and Library Science, the joint appointment at School of Data Science and Society, a principal investigator at the Center for Information Technology and Public Life at UNC Chapel Hill. Brian Hughes is research assistant professor at the School of Public Affairs, American University, co-founder and research director of Peril, the Politicization and Extremism Research and Innovation Lab. And as was mentioned before, he's worked with Define America around pre-bunking and other issues. And Vidya Ramalingam, who figured out a great researcher that we had talked about 3 years ago or 3 years ago, is a founder and CEO of Moonshot, a company working to end online harms using evidence, ethics, and human rights. So here we go. We don't have the clicker, but I think you're gonna be our manual clicker. Somebody walked off with it. The mic would be helpful too. Yeah.
There was a clicker. Yes.
So someone in the last panel.
Hello? Can you hear me? Yeah, there we go. Hi, everyone. My name is Zahed Amanullah. I'm senior fellow at Institute for Strategic Dialogue, or ISD. I've been with the organization pretty much since its founding in 2006 first as a community activist and journalist, brought in to work on issues of social cohesion, and then eventually joined to work on their counter-narrative program over 10 years ago, and have been working on various aspects of the organization ever since. Based in London, we have a new US office in DC as of this month. We have offices in Germany and Kenya and the Middle East as well. So I'm going to start with basically an overview of this situation. I did have a case study, which I'm going to talk about at the end, but in the interest of time, I'm going to try to go as quickly as I can. I don't want to take time from my fellow panelists. Could we go to the next slide? Yeah. So the main point I want to make before I go into this, we're talking about white supremacy online, but we always have to remember that what happens online will end up offline. We're talking about mobilization, recruitment, messaging, all of that. Ultimately, we've seen, and this is just examples from the press in the last few months, of the mobilization reaching a position on offline, which, and then you can see there's many different contexts here. We've all seen, for example, the neo-Nazis marching a week or two ago in Florida. We've had similar demonstrations in Georgia against a synagogue. There's a report there about neo-Nazis targeting a mosque in Belfast. So I live in the UK, so I'm very cognizant of the cross-pollination transatlantically. I've been seeing much more of a harmonization really. There are regional differences, but as was mentioned earlier, the core, the foundation of the messaging has been the same. And a lot of the techniques are being borrowed. So for example, the kind of public mobilization that we see in Florida, there's a picture of it happening in Finland, and again, in other, oh, great. And in other parts of the world. So it's, this is, again, not necessarily a new phenomenon, but it seems to be an accelerating phenomenon. And, the part that I'm interested in personally, because, and I'll get to this at the end, is there's two examples there of faith communities being targeted explicitly at their houses of worship. These are two very, and of course, these two communities have suffered terrorist attacks, well-known terrorist attacks over the past few years. So I'm keenly interested in support to those communities in light of this type of mobilization and this type of recruitment and these kind of threatening, displays of strength, if you will, that happen offline, regardless of all the trends that we see online. But I will go into just a few of the quick threat landscapes. That's a lot of text. I'm sorry, I just had to dump it there. But basically, I'm just pointing out some of the groups that have organized offline activities based on their online recruitment. We've seen, I'll go into the channels that they're recruiting. It's all the ones we know, the sort of the Gabs and the Telegrams and so forth, but increasingly now we're seeing on X and others increased exposure. There's threats to public officials. Of course, we've seen this around politically divisive issues, but also threats against, I mentioned, Jewish and Muslim communities, LGBT as well. Also, public officials who are of those backgrounds have been targeted. Obviously, BIPOC, AAPI communities on and offline have been explicitly threatened by these communities in the past several years increasingly. And of course, you have also accelerationists who are promoting and planning attacks on critical infrastructure. That's another aspect that's not necessarily, it's a more of a society-wide threat. Immigration and migrants, we've seen both here and in Europe explicit targeting of migrants who are, who are at refugee centers or in housing. I've been monitoring this again in the UK and just seeing extreme parallels between the way that people are mobilized to protest at these focal points. I mean, a lot of times when we talk about the offline mobilization that happens from the online, promotion of these views, you need a focal point, and these places are providing the focal points for people to mobilize offline. Now, the people who are protesting are not all members of these white supremacist groups, but they're influenced by them. They are, obviously influenced by the mainstreaming of these views in the political discourse, and that's sort of the cover for them. But it is, again, explicitly promoted by, there's two groups that are mentioning NSC 131 and are in Freedom Network explicitly. In the US and the UK, you have other groups that are doing that there as well. Britain First is one of the ones that's resurged because they've been replatformed. These are just some examples of the posts, of the rhetoric that are happening on. These are from Telegram. These are all recent. Some, are clearly anti-Semitic, anti-migrant. These things are, again, these are fairly mainstreamed now in the sense that there's very little, moderation of. I mean, there's enough exposure on platforms that aren't moderated, so these messages can get out. I'm sorry, I'm going to speed through this because we don't have much time. I mentioned the faith-based communities, Jewish communities, particular groups that are targeting them with names like Goyim Defense League, White Lives Matter, anti-Muslim hate groups that are targeting. Obviously, the Proud Boys have done this quite a bit, and also with a particular focus on Muslim political figures. And then let's not forget Christian communities, particularly Black churches. We've all known about, the attacks that have happened with that, but also a focus on churches and charities that support migrants and LGBTQ. This is, again, the faith communities are particularly vulnerable. There's just some examples of some of the messaging that's been posted against faith-based communities. I wanted to cover two issues that I'm not sure we've spoken enough about. One is content moderation. Up till I'd say the pandemic, we had an increasing understanding of content moderation, working cooperatively with Facebook, YouTube, et cetera. I know we did as an organization. We had great relationships with them and very constructive relationships about how to improve content moderation. That has slipped in the last year or so for many, many reasons. You can see even the same article heading there that was in the presentation earlier today. But obviously the big one is the change of leadership at Twitter. You see there's posts there showing on Twitter a verified account for a white nationalist group. There's an ad from Twitter up there explicitly white nationalist. It's a paid ad. And again, other groups that are, the explicit imagery that I know from working with Twitter back a few years ago, would be taken down within 24 hours. And now these are remaining on. There's another image there from the Double Waffen division. Another white again, white nationalists are openly on one of the platforms with the widest reach, with very lax moderation. So we're in a new era in a way, where this type of mass reach. It's one thing to go on Telegram or Gab or 4chan or whatever, where you're preaching to the converted. What these people really want to do is they want to spread their message to people who aren't normally exposed to their messaging, and they have platforms to do that now. Another issue is the moderation teams, that are having trouble for whatever reasons. Either they're not looked after, there's no duty of care for their mental health, or they're laid off for many reasons. So there's a lot of instability now when it comes to content moderation. We just need to focus on that, because that is a layer of protection that we need. Another layer of protection that we're not talking about enough here, but is happening in Europe, and the reason I think people need to pay attention to that is because it could have an impact here on potential legislation. Now, in Europe this year, 2 pieces of legislation are coming into effect: the Digital Services Act in the EU and the Online Safety Bill in the UK, each of which are attempting to provide sort of legislative muscle in ensuring a wide swath of online harms are addressed in legislation, coupled with fines and in some cases prison terms. Nobody knows how well this is going to be enforced, but if you want an example of European legislation that might affect legislation in this country, you've got GDPR, which came to effect 5 years ago, and that has had an impact on the way that Americans look at data privacy. You have 4 states that are putting up GDPR-style legislation, and it has a potential to impact legislation in this country if that legislation proves successful. So there could be that impact on legislation here, which will then again potentially provide another layer of protection. So the other thing that was brought up earlier today, and in fact I had a follow-up question to it, but we didn't get to it, but we're going to get to it now, is the impact of AI. And now this is kind of all over the place in terms of speculation, in terms of, we do know about its rapid growth, its rapid accessibility with generative AI and ChatGPT and others. We don't know exactly what the impact of this will be yet. I'm actually flying from here to Prague to give a keynote talk on AI and counter speech on Monday, and I'm racking my brain because it's new to me as well. But people want to know what we could possibly do about it. There's on the challenges and opportunities column there, we're talking about whether AI can be used for content moderation. There's various opinions about that. There's shoehorning AI legislation into the existing EU legislation. Those are all undecided questions, but they are questions that could provide some impact on what we're trying to do, because they will affect what gets filtered in or out of the platforms that we use and that bad actors use. I wanted to end with this, and this is just simply a personal experience of mine. I live in a small town in the north of England called Harrogate, which is like a small English, spa town. There, I live with a small Muslim community there, about 100 families, and we bought a building to turn into basically the city's first mosque. Now, having been in this space for 15 years, I knew what was coming. I've studied, how people mobilize against, again, these focal points, and I put together on my own time. This wasn't an ISD project. I put together a strategy of how we would confront this, and then one of the first things I did was, as Beth was talking about pre-bunking, I put together a strategy to both tell our story to the community, but to also start to pre-bunk some of the arguments I knew were going to come. There are people in the UK who literally mobilize strategies on how to undermine allowing mosques to be built in the UK for legal means, and say they know where the lines are in terms of their rhetoric online, and they have accounts on YouTube that won't get taken down. There was a 17-minute video put out against us this, you can see some of the rhetoric on Twitter and stuff, those posts. The great thing about it at the time is that when those accounts came up, they were explicitly targeting us. They were flagged by us and by all of the allies that we started to build in our community. They were removed within 24 hours. One of them was threatening a march, and I've seen many marches in the UK, in Muslim towns and whatever against mosques. And this one we were able to actually to not amplify and to deplatform to the point where it didn't even occur. Now you see some of these comments over here. You know, see there's an article there about what I did in that magazine. There's also a report on our website. There's a fundraising video that was put up. You can see me in it, and all of these comments. This wasn't last year. This wasn't last month. This was last week. So that video was to raise more money to help build the mosque, and all of those comments. There's two things about them. One is you can see the great replacement theory feeding into all of this. You know, and these are just normal people for the most part. I don't know if they're affiliated with extremist groups, but the rhetoric feeds through to everyday people and neighbors. The other thing is our allies, the first thing that they always do is they try to see if these people are from our city. And almost every comment is from somebody who lives somewhere else. And this is what's so important about keeping things local. When you build local allies and you create your narrative. I've created a 3-minute video introducing us to the community with like showing how diverse we were and what we wanted to do and all of that. And as soon as we did that, you know, our planning approval was approved 2-1 and it went sailing through. And those allies are still here today. You can see the leaflet campaign that was attempted. Within 24 hours, people walked all over the city and tore all the leaflets down. We didn't have to raise a finger. So there are strategies that you can do to push back successfully. It doesn't mean that the hate goes away, but the campaigning and the outreach and the narrative building and working with social media companies about what's promoted online. You need all of those. And this is a local context. It would be different in an American context or in another part of Europe, but it worked here.
Thank you. Okay, that was a great story. Oh, thank you.